right before we start taping, I turned to Hendon Hooker and I said, "Hey, Hendon, me and you have something in common. I'll give you $10 million if you guess what I said next."
Oh gosh. I have
don't even try. Just have him.
I don't know. What is it?
Hey, Hendon, we both tore our ACLs. And he was incredibly gracious. He goes, "Oh, yeah, what kind of graft did you get?" So we had a little conversation about that. I look, the man's 6'4", 215. He might have been in the first round conversation had he been healthy and a few years younger. That's all we have in common. Let's be real. So anyway, he was fun to talk to. And Rick, I'll go to you first because I think we all agree we have him as our QB5. But you have pushed back on me a little bit when I said I would consider him late in the second round. You don't like that, but you do like the young man, right?
Yeah, I love the kid and all the adversity that he has been able to overcome. And this is just another adverse situation with a torn ACL and being 25, like everybody is trying to poke holes in his kid as he comes out. But out of all these players that we have talked about, he is a one player that if you had to put money on a horse that is able to overcome all the negatives or all the red flags that people are putting on him, this kid's going to be able to do that. When we sat there and talked with him on the set, you can tell, like when you sit there and talk with a player, that he has that it factor. He has that quiet but confident leadership. You look at it in his eyes. We talked to Jalen Hyatt, the receiver, and everybody to a man from Tennessee said he was the first one in the building. They're supposed to be over there in the mornings for meetings. His car was always the first one in the lot and the last one to leave. So I don't bet against players like this that have shown to repeatedly overcome the adversity that they have faced. Now and then you throw what you watch on tape this year. I mean, the arm talent, everybody's criticizing Tennessee's offense and it's simplistic, but you still have to make those throws. You still have to make the correct decisions. And he even talked to us about how he did have to go through progressions in that offense. And I think he's underrated a little bit. Now, I know the ACL may inhibit him some, but he does make plays with his legs. So I was very impressed with the player that I saw on tape, and even more impressed after you sit there. And we had a 10-minute interview before Ryan pulled the mic from my mouth because I still had a ton of questions to ask. Apparently, Ryan Wilson is also the timer as how many questions I'm allowed to ask. But just trying to get to know the young man, I can tell that he probably knocked every one of those interviews with those teams out of the ballpark.
Brady, I'll tell you this: Pete Prisco doesn't like talking to the players because he would rather talk to the coaches and the GM, so he can do his thing. Rick loves talking to these players. I mean, he does it to the extent that I do have to tell him to stop talking because we're trying to get these guys through other things to do. So I give him a ton of credit for that. And he will ask tough questions too. And I'll tell you about some of those in a second. But I want to ask about Hendon Hooker. I don't hate him in the second round for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, for example. Rick's not crazy about that. I talked to teams that say late day 2, more likely day 3, which feels almost disrespectful to me. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I love the player. You guys talked about a lot of the adversity that he's fought through. Not only just changing schools, going to Tennessee from Virginia Tech, but obviously the ACL tear and everything else. But I think when you talk to the young man, he kind of has that you call it quiet confidence. It reminded me a little bit of Desmond Ridder from last year, a guy who was really experienced, also kind of had this quiet confidence about him and almost like a chip on his shoulder too. Obviously, the biggest difference is Ridder didn't tear his ACL, where that's what Hooker's battling back from. But both very experienced, just mature individuals. So I think kind of had that feel to them. The comp I threw out there was Geno Smith. And it's ironic that you think maybe he could be a second-round guy because that's what Geno Smith ended up being. Both players experienced, played a lot of football. Both came from offenses, too, that I think when you go back and look at them, you kind of said, all right, or were they maybe gimmicky? Was there a lot of stat padding because of the style and the things they were doing? I'd never forget that Tavon Austin coming across, catching this jet sweep pass. I think they did it like 5 times in a game, and he scored a touchdown on every single one of them. And you're just going, how nice would that be for a quarterback? You've got no risk. The shotgun snap comes, you push it forward. Tavon Austin takes it, does the rest of the work. And if you happen to mess it up, it's not a fumble, it's an incomplete pass. So you would see some of those concepts too with Tennessee where you're watching Jalen Hyatt run wide open down the field and you're going, okay, is how hard is this an offense to put up stats in? But as Rick pointed out, you still have to make the throws. You still have to play in those clutch moments and take on some of those giants that you have to play, like in Alabama. And so I'm a big fan of the young man. I like to call him better than, because he's got a better arm than you think. He's better athleticism than you think. Everything about him is kind of just better than you think. And so he's another kid you kind of throw into the category of, because I don't know that anyone looks at him as a first-round talent. So he's kind of with the rest of the group, and he's just a guy that I wouldn't want to bet against. We kind of talked about that with Jake Hainer. Hendon Hooker's another one of those guys.
Yeah,
and I
for sure.
Just add, Ryan, I don't mean to cut you off. Just wanted to add one more thing, is that I've interviewed thousands and thousands of players over my career, and just spending a few minutes with the young man on the set, there was something that just gravitates you towards his leadership, even though it's a quiet confidence. Reminded me a lot of Teddy Bridgewater when we interviewed him. Reminded me a lot of Jalen Hurts when we interviewed him, as far as personality, as far as that confident but quiet leader. And when he speaks, people do listen, because he's not going to speak up all the time. But you can tell when you sit there with a person, people and players will gravitate to him because of whatever that aura or that it factor he does have as a leader.
Rick, does that change your evaluation, though? Because you said the combine is mostly medicals and interviews. You know what the kid can do on tape, and you don't like him in round 2 last time we talked. Have you softened on that, or you still feel the same because of the age and the injury?
Well, apparently you didn't read my emails that I keep sending, so mine must go into his junk stack, because I never get a response. But eventually I hope that I'll get a response from Ryan from my emails. But I did put him actually in the bottom of the second round, and I did put him to Tampa, I think, is what I also said. So I think what Jalen Hurts went in the second.
You're right. You did. I see it right here. Debo wrote it down. My fault. Go ahead.
If you would get prepared for the show, it'd go a lot smoother instead of trying to read stuff as we keep going on here. Brady, you see what I have to work with sometimes?
I know.
I do respect all the work that Ryan Wilson. He is a fine young man.